listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, we're covering topics related to solo aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Praska. Let's grow old together. On today's episode, I'm joined by Autumn Nessler, who is a certified retirement options coach, specializing in assisting women to reinvent what's next, especially their post-career life. Her company, An Intentional Life LLC, helps women live life on their own terms. In other words, live an intentional life. Autumn understands the power of a successful transition plan. Prior to retiring and starting her coaching practice, Autumn successfully transitioned from being an educator to career counselor to human resources professional and finally to sales professional, in between with gigs as a solopreneur. Personal transitions included raising other people's children, divorce, and many moves. Having recently downsized, she resides in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania with her husband and is enjoying living her intentional life. Autumn holds an MS in Counseling and Human Relations from Villanova University and a BS in Elementary Education, Special Education from Westchester University. She is also a certified retirement options coach. Autumn, welcome and thank you for being here. How are you today?
Oh, I'm so excited, Cheryl, to be joining you for today's discussion. I've been looking forward to it.
Me too. So to let our audience know, Autumn, you are joining me today to discuss living an intentional life. We're going to cover life transitions, non-financial retirement planning, and retirement coaching with a special focus on women.
Yes.
So from our earlier conversations, I understand that you have personal experience that has given you insight really into the power of a successful transition plan to post-career life. Can you tell us about how you got into this line of work?
Absolutely. So first of all, know, Cheryl, that today there are millions of baby boomer women out there struggling to decide should they leave, quote unquote, the big job, right? And determining what's next. These women have, done it all, as I like to say, while, whether it's, their career, raising kids, maybe not, being married, maybe not. But at the end of the day, they've been on this merry-go-round and now they're saying, it's time to get off. I was one of those women. I still am one of those women. But as I like to say, the decision to leave the big job was made for me, not necessarily by me. Although, anyway, and I always say it was because of my husband's heart. Now, many heart events, many heart-to-heart conversations with myself in bathroom mirrors, I decided to make a move that I needed to do something different, dramatically different in moving forward with my life. I won't tell you all the details, but I myself went through a program in designing what I call my post-career, other people call it retirement life, my lifestyle, and then decided as I was going through that program that there was a lot of women like me out there struggling with the same thing. So that's really what prompted me to, leave my position, decide to start a practice. But I got to tell you that there was a lot of fear on my part, a tremendous amount of fear in making that decision to leave my job, right? Who would I be without my business card? When everybody else was working 9 to 5, what would I be doing? All this education, all these skills, all these things that I had, how would I continue to contribute those skills and talents? And finally, those relationships, we spend more time many times with our work colleagues than with our family and friends. How would I replace those key relationships that I had as part of my day-to-day life? So for all those reasons, I left the workforce. I got additional ideas in terms of how to do my own post-career life and decided to start my practice.
And when I hear the word lifestyle, I always think of it as this like your curated lifestyle. How do you want to live? But really, what what makes the most sense for you when you're living your life day to day and having to focus on, as you said, your husband or maybe another family member, or maybe you can make your career first and foremost. It's all just being able to make those purposeful adjustments, just like you're talking about.
Very much so. Yes. Well said. Yes, absolutely.
So, do share, what does it mean to live an intentional life?
Yeah. 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 I'm asked that frequently. So part of I think the real core foundational part of this is first, it's about examining and living our why, right? We tend not to do that. And so that's really what I first discuss with a woman is that you really need to think about, what is it that who do you think you want to be? What is life possibly going to look like? What's going to get you excited about getting out of bed in the morning? And it's not just going to happen. A lot of people think that this thing called post-career life happens by default, when the reality is you really have to design it, and you have the opportunity to design that post-career life. So part of it is, again, examining and living the why, realizing that this is a process and a planning process. It's not something that's done once and done and you can move on. It's an ongoing part of what makes life worth living. And it's also always about setting intentions. That's one of my favorite words. Having intentions for how you want to live this life. And then most importantly, having a plan to get there from A to B. And just not expecting, I'm going to retire and life's going to be fantastic. It doesn't work that way. Trust me. The data shows that it doesn't work that way.
I completely agree. And I recently was reading an article that said something to the extent of, we spend more time planning for a 2 week vacation than we spend planning for our retirement, which could be 35 years or more, depending on when you're able to retire. But right, you're not going to wake up feeling fulfilled for the rest of your life without having a plan and being able to feel purposeful.
And the key, of course, is doing so with intention.
Mm.
Right? That's the key, doing so with intention. That it's not just something that, and to be accountable for that, right? Personal accountability in this whole designing process thing is very much key to what makes it successful. Not just go out there willy-nilly and thinking it's going to somehow magically come to you. It doesn't, I promise you. So
So, why focus your coaching work on assisting women only?
yeah. So I ask that a lot. In fact, I get a lot of pushback actually about that. And as I like to say, tongue in cheek, it's my practice. I can work with who I want to. All right. But all kidding aside, I think, again, based on my own personal experience, which I shared a few moments ago, but also it's because women's retirement is so very, very different than a man's. And by that, I mean, we tend, believe it or not, we tend to still make 2022. I read a very disturbing statistic that in 2022, we still make as women 82 cents on the dollar of what a man makes. Still, all right? And it hasn't improved much because for years I said 80 cents on the dollar. Now it's a whole 82 cents on the dollar. So financially, we're going to have to work longer, number one. Number two, we also don't have, when I say working longer, we haven't, a lot of us take time out of the workforce. Forget if we're mothers and taking care of children. We could be caring for aging parents. On average, a woman will spend 12 years out of the workforce over the course of her career caring for others. Imagine the impact of that on Social Security, your financial investments, right? So that's one of the things that really prompted me to say, there needs to be a lot of work done in this area. We also, by the way, tend to live longer, 4 to 7 years longer than men. And like, as I mentioned earlier, there's an 80 to 90% chance we will be solo agers because of divorce or widowhood, or because we choose to be single by choice, right? So there's so many factors that work into why it's so different. We also tend to put everyone else's needs, and I'm talking family members, whoever it is that you feel responsible for, we tend to put everybody else first instead of us. So the idea of getting knowledgeable about financial investments and all that type of thing, we're so busy trying to make a living and then come home and fill all these other different roles. Who has time to think about financial planning and investing? So for all those reasons, I knew, and you made the point about the 2 weeks vacation, again, you're right, 20 to 30 years spent in retirement. If I do the math on that, the scary data is 57,000 hours of unplanned time. That's a lot of time not to have a plan for. So those are, and we tend to plan, like you said, for that 2-week vacation. But when I talk to them about, so what are you thinking about for this post-career life? They look at me like, can't do it, don't want to think about it. I'll get to it when I get to it. So yes, for those reasons is why I decided to work with women.
I'm already in a panic hearing 57,000 unallocated hours. I'm already like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know what I would do. How would I fill that time? So I'm going to have to start planning ahead with you.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned some, but I'm wondering, is there anything else about the unique things that you learned about women specifically with their retirement?
Well, again, as I said, we're very unprepared, and so part of that is, we work that 40 plus hours for our employer, and come home and work another 40 plus hours in all the roles that we play, whatever those roles are. So we're really unprepared, and so many of us have never put ourselves first. We don't even begin to know. Like, a lot of times, an interesting comment I hear frequently is, I'm not going to retire. What would I do? I mean, what would I do? So there's so many things, whether it's what they're going to do with their time, how they're going to disengage from this thing that's captured their attention for 40 plus hours every single week. I worked for 35 plus years, 4 very different careers. Like, you're telling me I'm going to go into this period of time with no plans in place. So it becomes very different. Again, all those reasons I mentioned about earning less, living longer, having maybe not spent a lot of time learning about financial planning, all those things factor into what makes it a very unique process.
Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live in a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendslifecare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. So you brought up solo agers, and many of the episodes in this season of the podcast were talking about topics that are related to solo agers. Can you share a success story about a solo ager that you were able to help through your coaching?
Well, as I mentioned to you, I think I'll talk to you about more really 4 kind of tips, I'll say, for those people who are solo agers as compared to a case study, because I think you're correct. There is some unique opportunities. Notice I don't use the word challenges. There's some unique opportunities when you're a solo ager. And I mentioned 80 to 90% of women will end up being sole wagers because of divorce or widowhood. So they're going into this as well, trying to figure out how they're going to do this. But there's 4, I think, key tips of what you need to consider when you are a solo wager. Well, first of all, from a financial standpoint, if you are single and have been single, all these years, the reality is that you're going to be relying, when you're thinking about, excuse me, post-career planning, one set of assets. Very different than a joint set of assets, okay? So your planning, I recommend your planning start even sooner than most other people when it comes to financial planning, because you're really responsible. And part of that, Cheryl, is how are you going to draw down? Everybody talks about you retire, you have to have a strategy in place for drawing down on your investments in kind of supporting your life moving forward. Your drawdown strategy as a single solo ager is very different than someone who's had two sets of assets to be relying on, right? So that's part of it. There's also the fact of long-term care. You know about long-term care. So when you don't have family, and like I told you before, just because you have children doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be well cared for when you get to that point. But your long-term care is going to be, again, up to you. So part of it is figuring out what you want to do, where you want to do it, how you want to do it, and then making sure that you have, as I like to say, women work in tribes. Make sure that you have a tribe of women who can be part of that, thinking about aging in place or whatever you're going to do, long-term care planning. And the other key critical pieces of it is you need to come up with your durable power of attorneys. You need to come up with your medical power of attorneys. Even more critical for the person who's single, to think about those things well in advance of it being necessary, right? The third thing that always comes up is, where are you going to live? And the great news is, I've been doing some research on all the options that are out there today. I mean, it's pretty exciting. There's something called shared housing, and that is where, think of the Golden Girls. Remember that old show where women gathered together and supported each other, lived in a house, etc. There's also what they call co-housing, which is everybody owns their own home, but you're sharing resources, ideas, etc., etc. There's also something called village to village. I just watched a wonderful documentary, and I'm hoping some of your listeners have as well, about this Dan Butera, I think is his name, who talks about the blue zones in this world, right? People who live that are centenarians, and what makes it so, and the importance of being in a community and a village supporting one another is critical, because older people, solo agers, a lot of people get depressed. Loneliness, isolation, all plays a factor. So thinking about, as I'm caring for myself moving forward, what are my housing options going to be? What are they going to look like? And then there's also this thing called village to village, where it's almost like a member-based organization where you kind of live separately, but then have joint meals or activities or whatever it is, but you share resources and all that type of thing to make it successful that you can age in place. And finally, and I say this to everybody, forget if you're single by choice or not by choice, the impact of relationships moving forward is so critical. I tell women that we work in tribes, and women more than anybody needs to establish their tribes, because that will enable us to live longer, live better, and be so much happier if you have those people that are part of your group, your peeps, as I like to say. And there's a wonderful website, by the way, called navigatingsolo.com. I encourage anyone that's listening to look into that as well. If they are a solo ager and are looking for more resources, ideas, it's a great website.
And something about relationships that I'm thinking of, maybe the importance of intergenerational relationships,
Yes.
because for anyone, because having all of your relationships being people who are around the same age as you're getting a lot of that same thinking. And if you're older, unfortunately, perhaps that relationship system, people are not able to help you as much as maybe a younger generation, because they have to start focusing on themselves.
Yes.
So that just came up for me, and all of your points I'm definitely going to be sitting on.
Yes. Call me, we'll talk.
Totally. So your first point was about a financial retirement plan, but then all of your other points were really about coming up with a non-financial retirement plan. So, what makes that different from the normal retirement plan that really most of us are putting on paper? And that's where our focus is most of the time.
Yes. And for the last, really, retirement has existed for about the last 50 years, 50 plus years. Before then, we were farmers. You worked until you fell off the machine, right? So the idea of retirement was so very different. And so part and parcel of that retirement is that it was all about getting to that destination, right? Getting there. How are we going to get there? You always hear people talking about that. And that's where kind of the financial planning came about, right? So it's always been about how much money do I need? I have a book in my bookshelf right now called What is My Number? Everybody, when they think about retirement planning, they think financially, what is my number? And basically what they're looking at is, how will I replace my earnings now to manage future expenses? But here's something that kind of flies in the face of that. If you don't know what your future expenses are going to be, because you haven't thought about anything other than finances, how are you going to know how much money to save? So I always say it's like putting the cart before the horse. What we should be thinking about is, what is my life going to look like? What is my lifestyle going to look like? How am I going to spend my time? Where do I think I might want to live? How does travel factor? All those things. And then back into the number. Because that way, in my work, as I always tell people, is it's not about how much I need, but what I need the money for. Okay, so that's really where non-financial retirement planning comes in. And a key part of that is putting some structure, some parameters around this unstructured time that we have ahead of us, 20 to 30 years, 57,000 plus hours of time. It's putting some time and some structure around that so that we're better able to feel like, I've got this. But as I mentioned to you, this is not about sitting down, writing a plan for 20 to 30 years. Trust me, we would run screaming from our I mean, that's ridiculous. And I always tell the women that I work with, how about 12 months? Can you do 12 months? We can think about that. And it's also key part of this is you have that opportunity as you're doing this planning to practice. Take your next vacation. Once you've kind of designed this look of how you want it to be, play it out, see what it feels like. Don't necessarily have, be spontaneous. Say, I want to try this out. I think this is how this part of my life's going to look like. Nothing to say and stand in the way of you trying it out. So that's what I always encourage people to do.
And the sense that I'm getting is more and more that everyone's retirement looks different. It does not mean that on this particular Friday you work, and then then you have the weekend, then Monday you never go to work again. So many people are like reinventing themselves and having their own businesses, or maybe getting a part-time job, or maybe continuing in a role that they've had for many years, just doing it maybe 3 days instead of 5 days. So that's very important for me to think about that. I'm sure in your practice, okay, well, you have how you want to live your life. What income do you need, whether it's from you pulling from retirement or continuing to work, do you need to maintain that lifestyle to make you happy? So it's just,
That's perfect. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it
So,
absolutely is.
so why should a woman think about working with a retirement coach as she is beginning to think about her plan, start transitioning from her work life to more so living a retirement life?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, it is probably, this thing called post-career life. Again, dirty word for me, retirement. This thing called a post-career life, though, it's probably one of the most challenging transitions in a woman's life. And I got to tell you that as women, we've gone through so many changes, so many transitions. We bought the t-shirt, And we've done it successfully because we're still here having conversations about it. This is something, though, just the sheer number of years, it's probably the biggest transition a woman will have to make. And for many reasons, she feels very unprepared. For all those reasons we've been talking about, right? Everybody else comes first. I'm going to work till I die, all these types of things. And you're right. There are so many options out there today. It's a very exciting period in history, in my opinion, because we can do post-career life as we see fit. And so to me, the sooner you start thinking about that, and the sooner you start thinking about, like, what do I want this thing to look like for me personally? Because you're right, everybody is very different. Everybody has a different strategy, a different way of approaching it, etc. Working, not working, periodic working. I mean, it's great. The people that I talk to about how they're living this part of their lives. So that's all great. But at the end of the day, most women that I talk to don't even have an idea of how to go about approaching this. How do I begin to think about that amount of time when I don't want my tombstone to say she worked, but at the end of the day, there's a whole lot of time that I got to think about for. So that's really where you kind of seek out someone like me. There's retirement coaches across the country. We're taking a larger foothold in this thing called retirement planning, which is exciting. But at the end of the day, it's never too soon to start. And I don't even say it's even too late, because a lot of times women will seek me out to help them kind of put some form and structure around this and helping them examining and living, their why. But they might do it like in advance, or maybe they're already living their post-career life and it's nothing that they expected. I think of all those women I talked to who had the not good fortune of retiring just as the world shut down because of COVID. And all their thoughts and all their plans and all their strategies went right out the window. Talk about depression, isolation, like what do I do? So I don't think it's ever too soon to start thinking about that. But I like to say that typically women, when they get to be about 55 or older, that's probably called a sweet spot to start thinking about this type of planning. And to be done, by the way, in conjunction with your financial planning. Mm-hmm. So you bring that plan, that 12-month plan, you're meeting with your advisor, right? Once a year, typically. And so you bring to that person, hey, this is what the next 12 months of my life are going to look like. Help me to draw down, help me to think about how I can start funding these things or whatever. And so it really becomes a partnership. I mean, financial planners are also starting to think about non-financial retirement planning. They're starting to get into it, but there's not a lot of them out there. I will tell you that. Most of them are just, they want to do this and this is the way they work with their clients. But more and more are starting to think about, hey, I need to do something more than figuring out what investment to put them in.
And when you've done the same thing for so many years, it can be hard to break out of that. So there is absolutely a place and a need for the non-financial retirement planning and, of course, the financial aspects of retirement.
Yes.
So I think I've hinted, but transitioning to this post-career life, I mean, I'm already feeling overwhelmed and I'm nowhere near retirement. So I can imagine people that it's creeping up on, or they have retired and they're thinking, oh my goodness, this isn't what I expected. So if we're feeling a little overwhelmed, how can someone really make the best of these years? Because they can be some of the best years of our lives.
Yeah. Well, and I really think that there's really 4 steps you can take. And, when I'm working with women, I help them do this as well. But just as you begin to think about this is, first of all, I mentioned a few times as we've been talking about this, examining and living your why. And the only way that to go about doing that is to really take stock of your experience, right? Sit down. I'm a big journaler. And so I tell everybody, buy yourself a beautiful journal, carve out that time on the calendar, write it down for this time you're going to set aside to do this. Grab your favorite beverage of choice and start to think about those things to date, your experiences, and kind of the lessons learned. the things that you loved about it, the things that you hope never repeat again, the things that you would like that future to include, right? Both the things that you loved, but also some other things you wanted to try. I mean, it could be that, you have a laundry list of things that over time you said, I'd like to do that, or I'd like to learn more about that. Start pulling that stuff together. You will be amazed at what your journal will help you to learn. It is an amazing process. The other key thing is, and this is a hard one, you have to reinvigorate your thinking. Now, as women, when I tell women you have to put me first, their common pushback is, that sounds awfully selfish, Autumn. I think that's wrong. But then I say to them, think about the airplane. Who puts on their oxygen mask first, right? It's, put it on yourself, then put it on your child. Put on whoever is with you, put it on you on first. The reality is, if you put yourself first and you look at all the roles that you play, isn't this wonderful, I hate that term, but 2.0 person showing up, moving forward? And isn't that what you want? Is that by doing that? And part of that is starting to think about, what could your future self look like? Now, this is where, like, fantasy, dream, whatever you want to call it, who is she? What's going to make her excited about the day? Really play with that vision, because they say there was a study done at UCLA. Love some of their studies. And they said that those people that really clearly could see, could really feel who that future self was, took better care of themselves, did more things so that they could make that future self happen. So that's the key, is think about, who is that future self? And obviously, with all of this, write it down. Put together, don't keep it up here. Write it down. Journals are a great place to do that. I have journals that I reflect back on all the time. And it's amazing the great things that I take away from it. The lessons learned, as I like to say. So you need to start tracking this information so that you have something to look back on to say, yeah, that is important to me. And as I'm starting to think about this planning, I want to make sure that, because all this information that I'm talking about serves as your filter at how you want to move into this post-career living.
And I wrote down, making space for myself.
Yes.
And that's eye-opening for me, because I find that I don't think I put myself last, but I don't always put myself first. I want to make sure everybody else in my life is okay. The people most important to me are okay. But we all do need to make space for ourselves. And I think as women, that can just prove a little bit more challenging, just the way that the world can be structured.
Right. Absolutely. And it is very difficult. I always tell people, the women that I work with, I practice what I preach. I do everything that I'm asking you to do. I know how challenging it can be. I know to find that extra half hour of time each week for some seems just insurmountable. But there are things like getting up earlier. There's a lot of things you can, or, while you're sitting doing something else or whatever, be jotting down. There's ways to carve out that time. It's just making that commitment to ourselves that is always the difficulty that people run into.
So this current generation that's approaching their post-career life, they're really doing it in a way that hasn't been done before.
Yes.
So how might these trailblazers be role models for our future generations?
Well, I think first and foremost, be excited about it. And that reason I say that is because really, for the first time in history, we have the opportunity as women, as baby boomer women, to carve out, to outline, to plan for, to do this thing called a post-career life differently than any of the generations that have come before us. And we're really paving the way We are the people that will pave the way for generations to come. So I always say, do it with an eye towards how lucky are we to be living in this period of history, even though we just come through this awful period in our history. But at the end of the day, this is a really interesting time. Like you mentioned about working, 65 and out is so old school. It is so old school. Again, the Blue Zone folks, 100, 95, 8, they're still working. They may be doing something different than they whatever, but they're still working. They're still contributing. They're still utilizing their skills and talents. And we live in a time when the types of retirement available to us, you're a serial retiree, you're a part-time retiree, a woman I got to know always defined herself as being a serial retiree. She's done and retired from 3 very different careers. And she said, I still got like 5 in me. So how exciting that this is. You have an opportunity to define, not only for yourself, but all those younger women that are out there today, what it could be for them. So I'm pretty excited about it. And there's so many more options available to us than our parents' generation. It didn't exist when our parents were retiring. As I tell people, I remember getting laid off the first time. My father wanted to call the president of the company. He was so incensed because how could he lay off this work? And I'm like, so we have this great opportunity to recreate what this thing is, and I'm excited to be part of that whatever initiative, whatever you want to call it.
So, Autumn, how can our listeners learn more about non-financial retirement planning and working with you?
Well, there's several ways, and thank you for asking. So I post frequently throughout the week, all different topics that I think are relevant to women in retirement. And they can find that either in any of my social media pages, and it would be under Nancy Autumn Nessler. Autumn's in quotes. Autumn's been my nickname and my business, name for many, many years. But they can find it under Nancy Autumn Nessler, both LinkedIn, Facebook. I have a personal page as well as business pages on both. I'm also getting ready to shortly kick off a new Facebook group that women can join. That will again be a way that we can gather for discussions about this very topic. So I'm excited about that. They can always be, I also send out emails with newsletters, articles, guides, etc. If they ever want to join my email list, it's autumn@designretirement.org. They can, certainly reach out to me that way and say, hey, put me on your list. And then finally, next year, probably in the first part of the year, I've designed an online series for women that I hope to run every quarter, and it will be for small groups of 6 to 8 women to help them with this whole planning process, etc.
Thank you. And that is so exciting. And just so our listeners know, we'll link to all of this in today's show notes.
Perfect.
So in conclusion, Autumn, I want to thank you for this conversation and sharing all of your insight and expertise in living an intentional life with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an honor, and I'm so excited you're doing what you're doing. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care VigR, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Autumn Nessler for joining us today. You can learn more about Autumn and An Intentional Life on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Autumn's website, designretirement.com. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.